Okay. Is that better?
That's much better.
Right, thank you. Thank you. All right. First, thank you to the committee and the mayor for giving me the opportunity to speak, and thank you for those who have come to listen to this presentation who have an interest in the issue. I'm going to go through just the initial pages of the presentation. If people have questions, I'll refer to the appendices. Please don't hesitate to ask questions at any time. So let me see if I can figure out how to... There we go. Wonderful. As many of you are aware, I'm going to try to put this down. There has been, for probably 20 or more years, some form of subsidy that I refer to it as coming from the MENDHAMs and the Chesters going to Washington Township by way of the funding formula and spending at the West Morris Regional High School District, which is constituted of both MENDHAM High School and Central High School. There are historical reasons for this, the way it kind of came to be, but the simple fact of it is that it's based on property values as opposed to per students, per pupil spending from each district. And the property values, since highways got constructed here 20 some odd years ago, are significantly higher now in the MENDHAMs and Chesters than they are in Washington Township. Before those highways were constructed, property values were probably of similar value. The $6.6 million subsidy in the last year is primarily, as you can see from this graphic, based upon the tax differential, which is a derivative of that property value-based formula. That formula cannot be changed. Let's put it this way: it's very difficult to have it changed within the construct of the existing school district, because it would require Washington Valley to vote to raise their own taxes by approximately $6 million. That's not likely to happen if they're rational beings. So what we're proposing is a dissolution of the high school district and a reconstitution of MENDHAM High School within a Chester's MENDHAM High School district. And we think the thing that probably makes the most sense from Washington Valley's perspective, although we would leave it up to them, is that they merge their high school with their K through 8 district to form a K through 12 district in Washington Valley. Although most of the subsidy comes from the tax differential, there is also some portion of the subsidy, the $0.8 million a year in the most recent year, that it represents a spending differential, where we also come up, as it were, on the short end of the stick. And that spending differential is governed by the regional school board. The school board, because the population has historically, I think since 1990, been of more voting age population in Washington Township than in the MENDHAMs and Chesters combined, the school board has been dominated by a 5-4 margin by Washington Township representatives, which has given rise to kind of what people have colloquially referred to as taxation without representation for us. But that actually changed this year because the most recent census, which is the 2010 census, now shows that the MENDHAMs and Chesters have more voting age population than Washington Township, and thus Washington Township was had to and did hand over one of their 5 board seats to Chester Borough, as the case may be. So that doesn't change too much, but it does have the potential over time to change this small kind of tail, which is the spending differential that's been in Central's favor. And all of these numbers are computed based upon what these numbers would be if it were handled on a per pupil basis within the district, as opposed to the way it's currently run. So the total subsidy is about $6.5 million. And what do we need to do to fix it I wouldn't say it's simple, but it's relatively straightforward, and we have the best shot of accomplishing our goals that we've had in 20 years because of that shift in voting age population. The first is we need to dissolve the district and reconstitute a new district for MENDHAM High School, serving the MENDHAMs and Chesters, as it does currently. We believe that Washington Township would probably want to consolidate their high school with their K through 8, but that's up to them. And the first step in doing any of this is to fund a feasibility study that will assist us in evaluating alternatives that we would want to consider before proposing a specific alternative to the voting public within these 5 jurisdictions, the 2 Chesters, the 2 Mendhams, and Washington Township, in order to put something on a ballot. You can only have one alternative to the status quo on the ballot, so we'll need to choose. And the estimated cost of this feasibility study, and these are all kind of wiggly numbers anyways, and always have been, but we think it's going to be around $40,000. It could probably range between $25,000 and $50,000, to be honest, but we think it can be done for $40,000 or less. So specifically, we're asking, just make sure I don't skip, so what's the ask for this committee? The ask for this committee is, which did appropriate $10,000 last year, as I understand it, for the study of 2 alternatives, which are the same 2 alternatives that we are proposing now. This committee did appropriate $10,000 last year. We're asking for that to be and it was not spent. So we're asking for that to be reappropriated this year, which shouldn't be too much of an ask, and we're asking for it to actually be increased to $15,000. And the reason we're asking it to be increased to $15,000 is kind of a couple reasons. The first is that Chester Borough, which last year it appropriated 10, also for the same 2 alternatives, has so far come back with $5,000 as opposed to the 10 that they appropriated last year. And the second reason is that we don't know what other monies what other sources of monies we'll get. We at least I would like to see Chester Township's governing body approached, but we'll see. The intent is to distribute the economic burden of the study, which is minimal compared to the savings that can be achieved, among the towns in general relation to the benefit that they would achieve if we're able to pass the referendum. So this is a little graph, if you will, or chart, showing you what the relative present value benefit for each of the jurisdictions is, and what that is as a percentage of the total, what the suggested contributions are for this study, and what that is as a percentage of the total. So the first question that no doubt comes up is, how'd you get these present value numbers? And what that represents, in the case of MENDHAM Township, for example, is the so I'm getting a little ahead of myself, the total subsidy $6.6 million a year for the Mendhams and Chesters. MENDHAM Township's portion of that is $3.3 million, so it's half. So the other 3 jurisdictions, essentially, among the 3 of them, share the burden of the other half of the subsidy, but MENDHAM Township by far has the greatest burden of it. And so when you present value that I think it's actually $3.346 million or something like that per year over the next 20 years, assuming that the status quo remains intact, which is not unreasonable given the fact that that's been the status quo for the past 20 years, and you discount it at a 4% internal rate of return, you arrive at a present value of $45.3 million of value for MENDHAM Township to change this. And that's the number that I think is the right number to compare with the cost of the study, because the cost of the study will be a one-time cost, and so it's in present value terms, and so you want to compare it to the present value benefit as opposed to the per annum benefit. So if you look at all these present value, and the present value for each of these 4 jurisdictions was computed the same way, MENDHAM Township has 45 of the roughly $90 million in present value benefit, and we're asking for it to put up $15,000 of the $40,000 expected total funding need for the study. All right. Any questions so far from either committee or public? No? All right. So the opportunity, as I've kind of alluded to already, is that from the township's perspective, which is most relevant to this body, is invest $15,000 now to generate $3.3 million a year in value for township residents, and thus, is it worth putting in $15,000 to generate a present value of $45.3 million? And probabilities would tell you that it's worth it as long as there's better than a 5/100ths of 1% chance of ultimately passing this referendum. So that's a relatively low bar to consider when thinking about, is this a good investment from an expected value perspective, from the perspective of the township. So the opportunity is not just an economic opportunity, but it's a timing opportunity. And the principal reason for that is this change in voting age population between the MENDHAMs and the Chesters. It could shift back. It'd be nice to strike while the iron is hot. In addition, this issue has been fairly front and center in a lot of people's minds recently, because last year the governing bodies all tried to figure out a solution for this, and the year before some of the governing bodies asked the school board to try to do, the regional high school school board, to hold a referendum to change the funding formula. Neither of those approaches worked, as I think everyone recognizes, and I think that the critical fact last year for not working was that MENDHAM Borough and Chester Township wanted to work with Washington Township in the spirit of cooperation, I presume, to try to come to a unanimously agreed solution. And Chester Township and Chester Borough holding the same expectation that I do, frankly, which is that it's unlikely that Washington Township will ever vote to raise their own taxes, thought that we should take a more narrowly defined path that's in the direct interest of their own constituents. Given the fact that trying to get consensus among all 5 towns did not work last year, I think that the reasonable approach, and the approach I'm proposing, is that all the 4 towns take the same approach that MENDHAM Township and Chester Borough wanted to take last year, and that is move forward without the cooperation, or at least under the presumption that Washington Township will not cooperate with this, because I think it's the only rational approach that remains. So it is also, so it's front and center, which is important, because we're going to need to ultimately get the public to turn out and vote, because having a voting age population greater than Washington Township is not enough to win the vote. You have to have more voters show up than Washington Township has, and those voters have to vote in favor of the referendum. So it's important to also try to address this while the issue is still front and center in people's minds. Finally, 2 more points, I guess. The relatively more challenging economy has not made people focused on reducing taxes. And so while 5 or 7 years ago it might have been a little more challenging to get out the vote for this issue, people would like to see an effective 10% reduction in their taxes, whether it's distributed to coming back to them as taxes or back to them through increased school funding that doesn't cost them anything else, because it helps property values and it helps the people in their community directly. And I'll come to where I get that 10% number shortly. So in addition to that, it's become more clear recently, as one looks at the independent studies, or I should say rankings out there of the public high schools in New Jersey, that while MENDHAM High School is still a very strong high school, there has been, from objective observers, a slippage that's taken place. And I'll come to that later as well. So the final thing I would point to in terms of timing is that these 2 schools at this point in time are pretty separate. There's virtually no one from MENDHAM or Chester that goes to Central, and there's virtually no one from Washington Township that goes to MENDHAM. There are a few special circumstances, exceptions, where children have unique needs, but it's really the exception. So schools are more separable than you would ordinarily find in a regional high school district. I think that's an opportunity to be capitalized upon, given the other facts here. So finally, given the fact that MENDHAM Borough, and this is quite important, has just last week reversed their position of last year and has decided to move forward and is willing to move forward with their $10,000 appropriation for this study, even if only these two alternatives that MENDHAM Township and Chester Borough last year was interested in studying are studied. That presents a unique opportunity relative to the logjam we were in last year. So Chester Borough also earlier this week, budgeted the money for $5,000 for it as well. So MENDHAM Borough's up for 10, Chester Borough's up for 5. I'd like this governing body to tonight vote to be up for 15, and no one's going to spend money unless we have enough money for the study, and these jurisdictions are all playing, the three at a minimum that I've just mentioned. We will hope to get Chester Township to agree as well. At least I would hope. That'll be up to Chester Township citizens, but I'll be supportive of any of their efforts if they choose to do so. I think that Chester Borough, from what I hear from people, the people are generally supportive of this effort because it is in their economic and academic interest, but there may or may not be as strong a commitment to it from their governing body. That we'll have to see. I don't know. So for these reasons, I'm asking that we seize the opportunity to do this now. There's a lot of work that has to be done before a referendum, which you'd want to put on the ballot for November, when other people are going to be coming to the polls anyways. There's a lot of get out the vote campaign. You're going to want to get this started early in the summer, so we really want to move fast on this. So the recent past I have already alluded to, which is that there was an attempt 2 years ago to get the Regional High School Board to put a referendum to the voters on changing the funding formula. That was blocked on the board by Washington Township's representatives, although to be perfectly blunt, I'm not sure it would have made much of a difference because in that situation where you're not dissolving the district, all 5 of the towns would have to vote for it, and I don't think you would likely have had Washington Township do it. But you never know. It would have been worth a try. And then secondly, last year, all the municipalities tried to work together, but they were not able to come to agreement. So in terms of materiality, and this gets to some of the numbers that I was alluding to earlier, is this material, for the consideration of the committee? Does this warrant consideration? The subsidy, the $3.33 million, whatever it is, per year, represents about 9.5% of taxes raised each year from MENDHAM Township residents. That's their 9.5% of their total taxes raised, not just those that are spent on things dictated by this governing body, but also for all schools and county taxes and everything else. To put that in perspective, it's more than twice the size of the single largest budget line item that this committee controls from my looking at the publicly available budget, and that's public safety. Public safety is often the largest single budget line item for governments, and it is here as well. So in addition to that, the projected annual value of $3.3 million is equal to nearly 2/3 of the $5.4 million of annual net taxation essentially controlled by this committee, which is the general appropriations that this committee uses to spend on the various services that the residents enjoy, less the revenues that offset the need to raise taxes that are also raised by this township. So it's in my opinion, the most important priority for the committee. And the numbers as it relates to the township's budget that support these bullet points are listed here in the table. So if anyone has any questions, I'm happy to take them at this juncture. Okay. So what now? Act again in the narrow interest of your constituents. Some people don't like me using the term narrow, but it's the only interest that's relevant. So you did it last year, and I'd like to see you do it even more emphatically this year. We appreciate the fact that you did it last year, and very much would like to see a strong commitment coming out of this meeting this evening. So I know there's been some history, at least that's the way the local law goes with the other governing bodies. I've asked all governing bodies, they kind of put that aside and just look to work together with each other. You can count on a strong level of involvement from concerned citizens such as myself, and I think that more that's the case, the more likely it is that that all the governing bodies will focus on issues as above to other things. So I believe that this is the best investment decision that you can make on behalf of the residents of MENDHAM Township, and I would ask that you appropriate $15,000 towards the study, and please do it now. So that is, I'm happy to go through I'll just put this up if anyone wants to go through any of the issues that are covered in the appendix. I'm happy to do it. I don't want to take more of anyone's time than necessary. You've been generous already. But I'm happy to go through any of these. And these are things that in the past they're a little bit complicated, to be perfectly frank. And so without having them kind of written down on a piece of paper that's relatively easily understandable, it's tough to always kind of be fully aware of what these are, month to month, because it's a little complicated. So I've kind of taken the opportunity to put them on paper, and in particular, what's the process and what does it take to win? To summarize that, the process is, and I will go through these two, and then I'll leave the rest for people to. The process is first conduct a feasibility study. That is required, and it is designed to analyze in more detail than this citizen can analyze, because they'll have access to much more data, the alternatives that we ask them to analyze. This would be done by an independent consulting firm. The two alternatives, to recap, that we are proposing is first to dissolve, in both cases, is to dissolve the current regional high school district. In one case, to simply reconstitute a MENDHAM Chester's High School District at West Morris MENDHAM High School. That's what I would call the maybe slightly tougher to get through the state, but probably easier to get done with the voters alternative, all right, because it represents the least amount of change and thus the most bang for the buck for voters with the least amount of change. Sometimes people are reluctant to embrace change. The second alternative, which probably has a better shot with being permitted to go on the ballot by the state, because it does consolidate a number of school districts, but it's probably a little bit more challenging to get the vote out for, would be dissolving the current regional high school district and creating a K through 12 MENDHAMs and Chester School District. There are probably many benefits to that, not just in terms of cost savings, but in terms of curricula coordination, as all these students who go to the same high school prepare to go to that same high school. But in my opinion, it's probably best to take this first small step first, and assuming we get that on the ballot, and then or at least consider taking the second step later. There doesn't need to be a connection between the two. But those are the two things that we're asking to study, which are the same two, as I understand it, that this governing body was interested in studying last year. Step two is that the MENDHAMs and Chester's governing bodies would jointly propose a specific referendum, meaning either alternative or alternative 2, because only one of them can be proposed, to be placed on the ballot, to be voted on instead of the status quo. The status quo is effectively always on the ballot, because if that ballot doesn't pass, the status quo remains in place. Step 3 is that...
Ryan, can I interrupt you there?
Yes.
On step 2,
Yep.
I just want to make sure we're in the same place. My understanding is that the proposal of one alternative requires 3 of the 4 constituent districts and 3 of the 5 towns, not just
That's correct.
3 of the 5 municipalities.
Yes, that's an excellent point. If you looked at, you probably can't see the footnote, but it says just that. This is kind of summarizing, just kind of colloquially saying MENDHAMs and Chesters, but you're absolutely right. Just to restate that, you would need 3 of the 5 governing bodies, for example, MENDHAM Township, MENDHAM Borough, and Chester Borough, as well as 3 of the 4 sending K through 8 school districts, which would be, for example, MENDHAM Township School Board, MENDHAM Borough School Board, and Chester School Board. Chester's K through 8 district is unified between the two towns. We're assuming that we would not get the support of Washington Township's governing body or K through 8 school board, but one never knows. So step number 3 is that the county schools superintendent, that's Morris County, although I think that person has responsibility for more than one county these days, must approve the referendum for submission to the New Jersey State Department of Education. And I think that, and then the next step, of course, is that the New Jersey State Department of Education must approve the referendum to be placed on the ballot. So these are 2 steps required. You need the county to get to the state, you need the state to get on the ballot. And, these are administrative steps that are required. There's another slide in here I won't go into in detail, but the state generally, the county is really just screening for the state, as I'm told. I don't know if that's exactly right or if they'd appreciate that characterization, but that's what I'm told. And so what the state is interested in is they're interested in generating efficiencies. And efficiencies typically come through consolidation, not deconsolidation. I think that this is a little bit of a different case than they might typically face because we only have a 2-school district. If you look at school districts out there, not just within the state of New Jersey, but within the country, you will find that in general there's a lot more than 2 schools in a district. And I would argue that the extra administrative layer of a regional high school administration is probably not completely, you don't need full bodies, if you will, for only 2 schools. And so we probably spend more than is necessary on a per school basis because we only have 2 schools in the district. I also understand, or I've heard anecdotally, that Trenton is looking to push more power down to principals in schools, particularly high schools. I don't know if that's the case, but I've heard that. This would accomplish. But I think we can make the argument that the study will confirm this, but I suspect that we'll be able to make the argument that it's actually more efficient to have two schools, 2 school districts than 1, because we'll eliminate that top layer of management and leave the management of the schools to the principals themselves. That's all speculation. Study will confirm, and we'll see how it goes. I would say one more point, and that is that if Washington Township were to merge their high school with their K through 8, and if MENDHAM Township were to have its own high school district without any consolidation with its K through 8, that would leave the number of districts in the state unchanged. It would not increase the number of districts. So it's not working against us. It just may end up be working for us. Any questions?
Yeah, I think you were actually stating what I was going to ask you the question about, is that right now we have 5 districts between the high school and the 4 sending constituent districts.
Correct.
And if I understand the one proposal, when we're done, we're going to have 5 districts.
That's correct. Okay. With the other proposal, we'd only have 2. but like I say, I think it's better to walk before we run, personally. But we'll see.
In your comments, I may be not clear, but are you suggesting this committee has authorization over the school budget?
I'm sorry?
You were suggesting in one of your slides that we have responsibility of the school budget. We don't.
No, this committee, if just to go back to that slide real quickly, my understanding is that this committee has control over what says general appropriations, which is $7.8 million. And this committee controls the revenue offset of $2.4 million, effectively. Control might be a strange word to use, but oversees at least. The rest of these budget line items, to my knowledge, are outside of your control.
Okay.
You're collecting taxes on behalf of these other, bodies. Thank you for that clarification. And thus, just to be clear, it's the $7.8 million minus the $2.4 million that's, I perceive as, if you will, in your control, that leads me to the $5.4 million, of which this $3.3 million is roughly 2/3 of. When I made that point earlier, that's the math involved. Apologize if I moved too quickly on that.
Can I ask you a question?
Yes, please. Although I have to tell you, I'd kind of like to see him finish his presentation. And
I'm happy either way.
We can ask questions, I think, as a whole.
I'll wait.
Okay. So So the final step is you put a referendum on the ballot, and then what's required to pass, you have to have, as we've mentioned, at least 3 of the 5 municipalities have to vote in favor of it, meaning a majority of the voters who show up at the polls from those municipalities have to have voted yes. So for at least 3 of the municipalities would have to have that be the case. In addition to that, you would need the total of all 5 municipalities. You'd need to win the majority of that as well. So that means that if Washington Township were to continue to have greater voting age population than the Mendenhams and Chesters, if they could just turn out their vote, they could keep us from doing this. Fortunately, that's no longer the case. So if we turn out our vote, we can pass this. It is within our control. When I say ours, I mean the citizens. Getting that vote out, is not going to be terribly easy, but it's something. If you're ever going to have anybody motivated to vote, this is probably the time. So that's, I guess, the short story. I have some other kind of interesting facts worth noting if people are interested. I did say I'd come back to the issue of the independent rankings. The one ranking people tend to pay most attention to, for better or worse, is New Jersey Monthly, which is actually not their ranking. They just publish it. It's actually conducted by Monmouth University. In 2004, Mendham High School was ranked number 4 in the state in that ranking. In 2012, it was ranked number 45 in the state. Is the 45, because you always worry about kind of errant data points, as it were, and subjectivity. Is that in keeping or out of keeping with other rankings currently? U.S. News and World Report, our high school 33rd in the state, and college-wise, which is a relatively new entrant to the ranking game, ranks our high school 91st in the state. I think Central's actually 79th in that one. So, do we need this money at our high school? I would argue we do. I think our kids get a very good education there. I've had 1 graduate. I have 2 in now, and I've got 1 more that'll be there. But I do believe there's been some slippage over the years that we've had direct experience with it. So that's really it. My motivation is completely apolitical, I can assure you. And it simply boils down to the fact that I am a taxpayer and I have kids in the system. We've been consumers of Mendham Public Schools now for almost 20 years. We'll be consuming those services for another 10 years, and we're big fans of the system. We just want to make sure it can be as strong as possible. So that's really, and these are support numbers for the analysis. If anyone's interested in going through this, I can. How I got to the 3.3 million, but the numbers are here. They're directly from the budget of the high school district, which you can see online. I think it's cited in the footnotes below. Now, I do include at the very bottom, and this is the most spurious. These numbers are a little bit spurious, I'd say, at this stage. I'm trying to get better data to narrow it down. It's unclear. There's somewhere between $5 and $10 million of money spent at the regional high school district that's not spent directly at either of the high schools. I don't think that's all administration. I mean, that includes paying for special needs children who go out of our district for their education. It includes a couple other things. So I'm trying to get data from the regional high school district to get a better fix on that. But if it were the 10 million, and if we could save 30% of that, let's say it was all administrative, we could save 30% of it. This is kind of a dreaming scenario, I would say, but you never know. There might be another, 1.6 million in savings, for the Mendenhams and Chesters, about $181,000, which I would see as being kind of allocable, benefiting, Mendenham Township. But those are not included in my core savings number because it's just too spurious at this point to include them. So I break them out separately. That concludes my presentation. I'd be happy to answer any questions from the Committee of the Public.
Thank you very much for the presentation. At this point, I'd like to invite questions from the Township Committee.
I've got some more, but I'll let Mr. Tolley start since he seemed to want to do it in the appropriate manner.
I want to do it in the appropriate time. Yes, specifically the group that was mentioned briefly but is integral to this whole process, the school board. What is your approach to reaching out to the school boards that must play a part in this study? And certainly must be, to my mind, must be involved in it. What is your success to date with them?
What you mean is the K through 8 school boards?
Exactly.
Yeah, we have not really reached out to them yet. The first thing we're doing is just trying to take the first step, which is get the study funded. We expect that the school boards will be supportive because we expect that their constituents will be supportive, and they'd want to look forward to a better funded high school for the students that they graduate from their respective 8th grades, but we have not had those conversations yet.
It was my opinion last year, remains my opinion, the school boards fundamentally should be front and center in this process. They're very responsible for the education of the students of these communities. Therefore, I find it interesting. I'd just like to know your success with them. Now, I do understand someone approached the Chester school system.
I have no knowledge of that myself, but I read in the patch that someone had approached them about funding the study, and that there was, I don't know, it was reported that they declined, and it was not reported why they declined. So I don't have any knowledge.
But
of
it
that.
wasn't. I don't know if you represent a group or just yourself. So whoever you're involved with didn't approach them.
Well, I represent Brian Cavanaugh, but I have, if you see on the front page of this, I've spent the past year listening to the back and forth, and if you look at the bottom left, you'll see Citizens for Better Schools. Over the past year, I've decided that I personally believe that their work on this is good work, and I'm working with them to try to get the data that would enable me as a private citizen to make a decision in the way that I think other private citizens would like to make a decision. And as it relates to the school boards, look, I mean, I'd love to see that be the case. I mean, believe me, I would have preferred not to have invested the time I've invested to date on this process. But, over 2 years, we just haven't seen it. And so somebody's got to do it, So I decided to try.
And you also indicated in your presentation that you noted slippage in the high school. Can you define that for me? I'm just curious.
Well, the objective definition is the definition that I pointed to, which are independent rankings of the high school.
Yeah, those are rankings, but you mentioned that you personally felt you had seen some indications of slippage.
That's my personal opinion. And what is it you like?
I don't know. I'm just trying to understand what slippage you've noticed. Do you feel the teachers are inferior?
No. Look, whatever you want to call it, homework, whatever. I mean, my impression.
I'm just asking the question.
Yeah,
I'm just trying to understand what you're saying.
It's hard for me to
Quantify it.
Well, it's hard for me to quantify, and also it's in the interest of my children not having any negative ramifications from my getting involved. I'll not be specific.
I'll
it's just that, it's just that my own personal opinion is there's been some slippage. It hasn't. I don't think it's been dramatic, and it may be related to nothing more than the fact that the last high school budget did not get approved. I mean, they're automatic 2%, so they can be getting approved. But the last time they came, I believe it was not approved. And anecdotally, I don't know this to be a fact, but anecdotally, what I've heard is that there's been some negative repercussions, because of that. But from my perspective, it just seeing the way my children have interacted with the system that has led me to believe that there's been a little bit of slippage there. And personally, I don't believe there's been the magnitude of slippage that the rankings would suggest. But the rankings are independent, and so I take them with a grain of salt, but I take them.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Chris?
Did you go through the MENDHAM schools yourself, or any?
My wife did. She grew up here, and she was one of the first classes at MENDHAM High School. Her older brothers started at Central, as a matter of fact. But we've been consumers of the school system for the better part of 20 years, and like I said, we'll be consuming it for another nearly decade. Third grader is the last one in the line. So
Good for you.
thank you.
No, that's it.
Mary Beth or Rob?
By the way, just on that point, I did go to public school. I grew up in Montgomery County, Maryland, where there's only one district in the county, and that governs all the K through 8s, high schools, everything. So it's a very, very different construct than we have here in New Jersey. I'm kind of approaching this from the perspective of someone in New Jersey, because there'd be much more radical change that someone, growing up from that approach would probably propose.
Well, it's a bigger problem in New Jersey than just the schools.
Right, yeah. No, I'm aware of that. Yeah, police and everything else is countywide down there, yeah.
I just have a couple of, number one, it's been my belief from the beginning, given this discussion, that I think this is a bottom-up thing, meaning we need to start with the schools before we can move, because if we don't have the buy-in from the schools, it's going nowhere. And if anyone who's had kids going through the elementary school, you know how proprietary those parents are, and how they are, and the thought that what you moved here for could change. You're really, I think you're heading down a dead-end road on that one. So I really think you need to do some legwork in that area. And number two, regarding the slippage, I truly believe that now that we have a new superintendent, and he's made some significant changes administratively, and given if he has the support of the board, I think we'll start sliding in the other direction if he's given the support to implement the programs that he's planning on. And number three, as as chair of the finance committee, we're having a really hard time finding $12,000 for the firemen for life safety issues, and so to come up with $10,000 would be really hard. Now you say you want us to go up to 15. It's something that's really going to have to, I don't know where it'll come from, to be bluntly honest with you. So
okay. Well, I appreciate your comments. I'll try to address them one by one. Let's see, in terms of the money, I'll go in reverse order, and I may ask you to remind me of some of them. In terms of the money, $10,000 was appropriated last year. It was not spent. It was not returned to taxpayers. So $10,000 to $15,000 is there. I mean, I know municipal finances, different from that and the rest of the world, but
different animal.
But the reality is, it was taxed. People paid it in taxes. It was not spent. It was not returned to taxpayers. So I believe that the incremental ask here is really $5,000. And if you saw the numbers we're talking about, there's no better return on investment for that money than spending it on this. So I have a strong feeling about that. I'm happy to take that discussion offline and go through the numbers if you're interested. On the second point, I don't know the superintendent, so I can't speak. I appreciate your opinion on that. All I know is, what's happened objectively, and the only thing I can objectively point to are independent rankings over the substantial history, and that has correlated with the substantial history of this subsidy. For our tax dollars, and for MENDHAM Township, out of every dollar that these residents pay for the high school district, 65 cents goes to their own kids, and 35 cents goes to Washington Township kids.
Yeah, Brian, I do have to stop you there for a moment.
Okay.
This subsidy system has been in place for many, many years, decades. And the slippage that you're referring to is, I think, a relatively recent phenomenon.
Well, over the past decade.
Right. The point I'm saying is a causal relationship is not established by the fact that the subsidy is still going on and that the rankings are failing. That's just not a causal relationship.
Well, let me put it this way, Mr. Mayor. If it were the case that instead of sending $6.6 million to Washington Township to educate their children at Central each year for the past decade, and I don't know if it's in 6.6 all those years, but the past couple of years it has been, I would argue that MENDHAM High School, if it had even half that money, would be a significantly better high school. So if people disagree with that, I will quote Voltaire and respect your opinion, but I personally believe that we would be better off if that money had stayed in our own school. And you're absolutely correct.
I don't necessarily disagree regarding the distribution of funds. My point is that the current system of funding was established decades ago by state mandate. The same state that we're asking to fix the problem.
So my understanding is not consistent with that, and I may be wrong. I'm not a historian on this, but what I understand is that when the district was first constructed, which was back in the 1950s, I believe, MENDHAM High School didn't exist, of course, until roughly 1970. It consisted of Central High School, where MENDHAM sent children, and I think maybe Mount Olive High School at that time. When it was constructed, the municipalities were taxed was on a per pupil basis, as we would like to now. And then somewhere around the time of, I believe it was the Abbott decision that led to the creation of the Abbott districts. For those who are not aware of what the Abbott districts are, that was a court case that was brought on behalf of the poor communities, the really poor communities, Camden, Newark, Passaic, Neptune, Trenton, in the state, that said, look, twice as much money per pupil is getting spent on kids in the suburbs relative to kids in our system, and the state basically agreed that the wealthier communities should subsidize those poor districts so that it could be brought into equilibrium. In fact, I think it's been brought quite a bit beyond equilibrium if you look at the movie The Cartel a few years ago, and you're right, it still doesn't work, which is unfortunate. But what Abbott did was it created this sense among lawyers, I suspect, and thus governing bodies, that was kind of generally applicable, that you needed to have a property value-based system for how everyone would contribute from their districts. Obviously, at the district level, at the municipal level, you can't do it. By state mandate, it has to be based on property values. That's why someone who doesn't have kids in high school doesn't get a freebie, right? Everyone pays, right? But at the district level, it was determined, I don't know by who, but somewhere the governing bodies must have approved it. Governing bodies loosely defined, either the municipal governing bodies or the school board or whatever, they changed the formula. And they changed it because they thought that was necessary to be in legal compliance with the opinion that was rendered in the Abbott case. It was determined, as I understand it, within a year of that that was not necessary. But now that they had changed it, you couldn't change it back without the approval of all 5 towns. And because if you're in a district and you're not dissolved in that district, you need all 5 towns to individually approve it. And I don't know if it was an issue right away because, MENDHAM High School got built in the 70s. Abbott was probably in the early 80s, but I'm not sure. I don't know if anyone remembers exactly when that case was. The highways, 78 and 287, really didn't go in until, kind of the early 80s, maybe even the mid 80s when 287 got completed. That's really what drove property values. It used to be property values in MENDHAM, I don't think, were all that different from what they were in Washington Township. But the MENDHAM's and Chester's property values increased substantially relative to Washington Township, so that's what created this.
You're giving us a very long explanation. My point was that the original system was set up on a per pupil basis.
Correct.
Which was the deal, if you will, that all the towns agreed upon at the time they went into this deal. That was changed, however it was changed, under compulsion from the state. So frankly, the state created the problem.
Okay, that, like I said,
well, that's a fact.
Okay.
So anyway, I just wanted to point that out because that system was in place long before the issue of quality came up. And I'm not questioning whether money goes into quality. Sometimes it does, sometimes it doesn't. But I want to get off the point. I want to let Rob finish his questions.
Okay.
So I do have questions and I also have comments, and I don't know what your pleasure is. Should I can stick to questioning and then make some comments later, or?
I think I'd like questions right now, and then I'd like to open it up to the public and let them ask any questions they may have.
Okay. So one question, Brian, and it's one that always confuses me, is that you showed it was a bigger number than I expected. $8.5 million in state funding.
Yeah, that's a number that I'm trying to get a better handle on. I see it somewhere. It's like $4.5 million.
That's the number that rang more bells with me. Is $4.5. But the real question is, how much of that is attributable to the participation of Washington Township in the district versus the other 4 towns?
Yeah, that's a good question. And that's something I'm looking into. What I what I've been told by some people, but I want to do some more homework myself, is that that relative to an equal distribution of that, there may be a little bit more that goes to Washington Township. It might be, in the hundreds of thousands of dollars. So of $4.5 million, it might be a few hundred thousand more they would get than we would get, as opposed to being divided equally. Because there's a small component of that state aid which is related to issues that are unique to them, not to us. I don't know if it's transportation because they're more spread out, or if they're deemed to be slightly less well off than we are, so there's an economic need. But they're in the state's categorization of socioeconomic class, A through J, Camden being an A, MENDHAM being a J, Washington Township's an I. So there's not a significant distinction. And actually, this is an actually interesting point. I mean, from a social justice perspective, one might argue that it's okay, that it's appropriate to subsidize another school, but only if there was a need there. I don't perceive there to be a need there here. It's two rich communities, essentially.
And the other thing I wanted to explore a bit further, because the reports that I've read on what Chester Borough did and what MENDHAM Borough did are a little bit confusing to me. I could tell you that Chester Borough appropriated $5,000, but I'm not sure for what. And I can tell you that MENDHAM Borough appropriated $10,000. But theirs was, as I could understand it, fairly conditional, and I was wondering if you had any more details on all of the conditions.
Well, I have a lot of details on MENDHAM because I publicly negotiated them at the last meeting last week. So MENDHAM Borough has said that they will appropriate $10,000. All these appropriations are subject to approval, as yours would be, right, in terms of the actual spending, but it's being budgeted. The appropriation is the budgeting, the setting aside of that money for this purpose. And so the MENDHAM Borough Council agreed to budget $10,000 for this on two conditions. The first condition being that at least two other towns budgeted money and went along, because we need at least 3 of the 5 governing bodies to make this happen. It'd be a waste of time otherwise, right? And the second condition was that they are willing to study, unlike last year, only the 2 alternatives that I proposed, which are consistent, as I understand it, with the 2 alternatives that this governing body was interested in studying last year. So that's good news. Although they reserved the right, if to get the governing bodies on board, insufficient to fund the study, that some other governing body, yourselves, Chester Borough, whatever, said, we need to also study this. They reserved the right to also come back and have the right to study that as well, which did not seem unreasonable to me. But I think the likelihood is that that the governing bodies, at least the 3 governing bodies I've mentioned, will be happy, based upon your position last year and Chester Borough's position last year, to study the 2 alternatives that MENDHAM Borough agreed to study.
And I don't know, well, I don't know where I heard it.
Chester Borough I can't speak to, I wasn't there.
Yeah, so, and I don't know where I heard this, but was there possibly a condition of MENDHAM Borough saying that there had to be equal funding from the towns?
In spirit, definitely so. I don't know whether there's a hard condition on that, but I think that what we proposed was you spend 10 of the amount to them. So if I think their expectation is that, Chester, because this is what we originally would have come in and asked everybody for, 10, 10, 10, and 10. I think their expectation was that would be the case. But with Chester coming in at 5, that's why we felt it would be important for this governing body to commit 15.
Brian, may I ask you to interrupt for a moment while we do a tape change?
Sure.
Other question? Or?
No, I have no further questions.
Actually, let me just, if you don't mind, I'll come back. I forgot to address the first of committee member Thomas's points. And that, if I recall, was that you believe that it made the most sense for this to be ground up. Mm-hmm. I agree with you. I think that is the case. I actually believe, no discredit to myself and those in the audience, but the ground is actually the citizens. The school board are one level above that, And so I think that our game plan is certainly to have citizens let their various governing bodies know, whether it be municipal government, whether it be school boards, know that this is something important to them, and that hopefully those governing bodies will, be responsive to that. So we definitely do want to. It's definitely part of the plan because it's a necessary part of the plan, as you correctly point out, to get school boards on board. Sorry for not forgetting that before.
Okay, I'm just going to add one or two comments, if I may, because some of my information and some of your information are not completely in sync, so let me share with you. I spoke with Mayor Davis of Chester Borough today, and he confirmed that, in fact, Chester Borough has set aside $5,000 for a feasibility study of, as he put it, something. I specifically asked him, what are the options that were chosen for study? And he said there have been none designated as of this time. The process, he thinks, still needs to pursue the good of all 5 partners, not just 4 or 3. Those are his words, not mine.
Okay.
I've also spoken with Mayor Cogger of Chester Township, who stated that they have not yet passed a resolution authorizing a township contribution toward any possible feasibility study, and that furthermore there is no appropriation planned for the township's 2013 budget. I did speak with Mayor Henry, who kind of took me through the process. I'm a little bit troubled by the fact that I was reported to me that the final vote was 3-2, and the members were not, as it was reported to me, in unity regarding exactly what options should be studied. I will tell you, just from my own perspective, that one of the things I've been concerned about is, as bad as things are, they could get worse for our taxpayers. If we were to go into, for example, what was proposed last year as a mega district, where everything was handled in a regional district, it's possible that a subsidy situation that's already, from our perspective, unacceptable could become even worse. So we have to be somewhat concerned about that particular alternative. I think that's what gave a lot of us pause last year. Those are just a couple of observations on my part. At this point, I'd like to open it up for the public.
May I respond?
Sure.
Yeah. So I completely agree. There's no need to consider when you say mega, I assume you mean including Washington Township.
Yes.
K through 12 district.
That was one of the 3 things we pushed last year.
Right. No, I agree. And I am not here advocating by any stretch of the imagination to study that. I am against studying that, to be clear. So I guess I'm cautiously glad to hear Chester Borough did not put any conditions on their appropriation. I'd be happy and I'm sure citizens of Chester Borough would be happy to speak with their elected representatives if more discussion is necessary there. And in terms of Chester Township, we'll have to see how that goes. It's not a slam dunk that their governing body will be supportive of this, but we'll see what Chester Township residents want to do. So. But I completely agree. There is no benefit to us in studying that global K through 12. It includes Washington Township. That would likely increase the subsidy. I'm not sure it would do much for school quality either.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
Again, what I'd like to do is like to open up the floor to members of the public. I would like you to concentrate your comments, though, if you will, about questions that you might have for Mr. Cavanaugh regarding his presentation, rather than, if you will, speeches about whether or not we should go and do something in the future. I would like him to have the opportunity to respond to any questions that people might have from the floor.